The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. With 814 million voters heading to 930,000 polling places to cast ballots for 370 political parties, India's general election can credibly lay claim to the title of world's largest election. In this year's contest, the Congress Party, which has dominated Indian politics since independence, is facing a serious challenge from the Hindu Nationalist BJP. A third party, the AAP, which is running on an anti-corruption platform, is also garnering significant support. To help us understand the dynamics at play in this exercise in democracy on a grand scale, we're joined by Aneesh, Associate Professor of Sociology and Global Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where his research and teaching include a focus on globalization, science and technology, and economic sociology. And Darshan Pandya, an independent systems consultant and daily observer of the election process. A frequent visitor to India, he just made his last trip 1 month ago. Well, welcome both of you to International Focus.
Glad to be here.
Well, maybe you can start, Aneesh, with giving us just some sense of what's actually being contested here. What is the election really deciding?
The election is deciding the next government of India. And it's, as you said, it's the largest in the world. And India follows the parliamentary system of democracy. So it's electing about 543 members of parliament, called the lower house, which selects the government. And unlike the US, where the president is directly selected, actually it's the party and the majority of the members of the parliament, of Lok Sabha, the lower house, will elect their prime minister.
And we said at the outset we have something in excess of 800 million voters. So talk a little bit about the process, if you will. This is certainly not something you can go to the polls in a few hours and be done with, can you?
No. As you said, 814 million voters, and there are 543 seats in the lower house. That's more than 1 million voters per seat. That is a very large number of people, very difficult to accomplish. And the Election Commission, which is a constitutional body, was established many years ago to oversee these elections. And so they are looking after all this.
So what are the major issues?
I think this is one of the most important, elections in recent history because of two developments. One is the anti-corruption wave in India, especially urban India, has been really strong for the last 5 years. And one of the reasons people say the incumbent party, the Congress party, might lose the elections because of its failure on the corruption front. So that's one. The second part is that the issue of social media and new technologies. So urban voters are much more engaged, who used to be a little disengaged, urban young voters particularly. So those two factors are relatively new, I think, in this election.
So you mentioned corruption. Can you tell us a little bit about this third party, the AAP, that really has positioned itself as the anti-corruption party?
Yes. Last December, they had some municipal elections in Delhi. And the Aam Aadmi Party, very, very surprisingly, came out of nowhere and got a significant number of seats, which surprised the BJP and the Congress Party. The Congress Party had been essentially ruling Delhi for many years, and the chief minister of Delhi lost her seat. Nonetheless, they didn't have an absolute majority, and the BJP and the Congress Party decided to let them try to form a municipal government, which lasted for about 50 days, because they were a minority and they were trying to change too much too soon. But now they're trying to go national, and the good question is, will they succeed nationally in the way that they did in Delhi?
So this issue of corruption, is that more of an urban phenomenon, a rural phenomenon? I mean, if the average voter would share the view that something needs to be done, or does it depend on where you sit?
That's a very good question. It spans the whole of the country. I mean, even rural areas are very well aware of corruption, corrupt politicians, the corrupt system, corrupt bureaucrats, and for years on end. But I think this recent wave started with by Anna Hazare and actually Aam Aadmi Party's chief Arvind Kejriwal. He has been the kind of spearheading this movement for some time. They have captured the attention of urban India more than rural India, for sure. And their recent victory, surprising victory in Delhi, in the state of Delhi, was partly because Delhi tends to be mostly urban.
And, you referenced the municipal elections. To what extent, as we see in other places, is this seen as a bellwether? I mean, do the municipal elections in any way provide us with a insight into how the national elections may go?
Only to an extent. They do, but only to an extent, because India is still more rural than urban. The trend is, of course, towards more urban, and eventually it will be more urban. But for the moment, I don't think it's a complete bellwether. It is a bellwether, but not a very strong bellwether.
Well, it seems in elections just about everywhere, the economy certainly plays a role. What is the sort of issue that's being contested on that front?
I think, yeah, I mean, that's a very important factor. I think for the last 10 years, the Congress Party has been ruling the country through its alliance. And what has happened, I think the growth has slowed down. One could blame only partly to the recession of 2008, but India was not as affected as the Western countries were. So some are blaming the Congress Party for not engaging or developing the infrastructure, which is the basis of further economic growth, as much as they should have. So economic factor might be playing definitely a role behind it all.
And how vulnerable to those kinds of attacks is the Congress Party in that they were essentially in some manner more or less perceived as incumbents for much of India's history?
It's very significant. But I would also mention the historical baggage that India has since independence has had, namely vote bank politics, which also is related to corruption, because when you have vote bank politics, it lends itself to corruption. This is a historic election, and I think it's an election, either this one or the one which will come next. It's a historical election for what is India all about? Is it about vote bank politics, or is it about voting based on performance? So the economics part does come into it, but it's also about more than that.
And an interesting set of issues are the role of women and women's safety, women's rights in the country. Talk a little bit about that, how that's risen to a national level.
Yeah, that's an important angle that has emerged in mostly urban India. It's partly because of that particular famous case in Delhi where a middle-class woman was raped in a bus. And that catapulted, but it also shows that politically, the Indian urban youth has become much more active, especially in big cities like Delhi and Bombay and Mumbai. And that has become, and I think that was one of the reasons why the Aam Aadmi Party was able to win so much support, because people were desperately looking for change. But the cases of women's issue is a kind of slightly more difficult than that, because India has layers, strata of different social classes, different rates of literacy, different actually norms and values. So what we think, when we think of urban India, yes, modern values have infiltrated most of the middle class probably. But the lower classes who are still migrating from rural areas are in a kind of totally different orbit, So the kind of merger of the two in these big cities is a kind of, people are saying that there's always the potential for, these kind of wars between classes. So in some ways it's a class war, not necessarily in the economic sense, but in social sense.
So let's talk a little bit then about the standard bearers for these parties, starting with the BJP.
So Narendra Modi has been nominated as their candidate for Prime Minister in the event that they form the next government. The Congress Party, the outgoing Prime Minister has indicated he will not be interested in that position. And they have not really decided who should be their nominee. Rahul Gandhi, a member of the Gandhi family, Sonia Gandhi's son, has been projected as a possible nominee, but he has not really distinguished himself in the public eye. And then there is a possibility of a third front. It didn't seem like it until recently, but there might be, of other independent parties. If they are able to cobble together a majority, then it could be one of the chief ministers of one of the largest states. They might be nominated.
So how is it the Congress Party, which has had such a prominent role for so long, has not been able to settle on a candidate at this late date as people are going to the polls?
Yeah, I think Rajiv Gandhi has been kind of reluctant to accept that responsibility. And so for the last 10 years, Manmohan Singh, who is an economist, has been running the country. And but he is aging, and he has openly said that he would not be the next prime ministerial candidate. So Rahul Gandhi kind of by default has become the face of Congress's election. So we don't know whether he will accept the position eventually, or he will choose someone more capable in administration instead of himself.
And how does this affect the prospects for the Congress Party? Just presumably, I mean, the family has a cachet, or in some cases probably has a negative effect on voters, depending on where you stand in society. I mean, is his presence as a potential prime minister cut both ways, do you think?
Yes. Well, election after election, the Congress Party has slowly but steadily been losing votes. So it's at a point now where perhaps the Gandhi family will not be able to influence the Congress Party if the Congress Party does badly in this election. And the Congress Party may just go for other leaders, depending on the outcome here.
Well, when we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about how this really is a different kind of election, and how the things that motivate voters may be changing. But first we'll take a short break. We'll be back with more International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus and our discussion of India's election. Well, before the break, we were talking a little bit about some of the issues. Now, traditionally, we also touched on the fact that identity politics really plays a big role, or has historically. In this election, is that changing? Are people voting more on interest, or more on who their perception of who they are is?
I think it is changing, and this is why this is a historic election. If not this election, but the next one, then the next one. Identity politics is slowly going out. And the question now is, I would say, which party can best represent the people of India without identity politics. Congress historically has used identity politics to its own benefit. The BJP has been associated with the Hindu majority. The Aam Aadmi Party has tried to avoid being associated with both of those things. And that's the question. I'm not quite sure how it'll work out, but the BJP is trying to shed that historical baggage, and then the Aam Aadmi Party is there also.
And let's talk a little bit about Mr. Modi in that light. I mean, he is certainly vulnerable to a certain amount of criticism from his past career. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think he deserves some of that criticism because he was a very active right-wing leader of a Hindu party. He started with Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is an older Hindu outfit. But in recent years, we must also acknowledge that he has changed his image and as well as his work in some ways. So while he's widely associated with, I think, 2003 riots in Gujarat, although he has not been indicted for those, for those riots.
Talk a little bit, just for our viewers who may not be familiar with that history. What happened?
So in Gujarat in 2003, there was a train in which 60 Hindu pilgrims were traveling, and the train was set on fire, and all the 60 pilgrims died. And the story goes that people widely believe that it was the Muslims who set the train on fire, and then they went ahead, and there was a kind of Hindu nationalist cry, in Gujarat, and they went and killed about 800 to 2,000. The number is not very clear. 2,000 Muslims in Gujarat, and when Narendra Modi was the chief minister, so it was under his governance that happened. People have not found direct links with him and the riots, but because he is part of this right-wing nationalist party, many people still believe that he was at least complicit in some way with the riots.
So,
yes, if I can talk to that. Carrying on from that, actually, because obviously there was a big outcry about this, and particularly by the Congress Party, because the BJP and Narendra Modi both were potential threats. So they have tried over the years very hard to have him somehow incriminated and penalized, and they have failed. In fact, the Supreme Court of India appointed a special investigative team to investigate the riots. After years of investigation, they have found no complicity by Narendra Modi in these riots. So they have essentially given him a clean chit. Nonetheless, in this election, everybody who is not BJP has tried to label Modi as being complicit and as being guilty, even though there has been no evidence found against him.
Well, I'd like to read a quote, if I could, and perhaps both of you could comment. This is from the India edition of the Daily Mail. And the writer says, "Today, identity is a fixed label with all the sensitivity of a mimosa plant. Identity becomes a form of anxiety which anticipates even imaginary threats to its stability. Within such a context, any aspiring politician can turn imaginary or imagined hurt into a career." So, do you think that that's... You've touched on the fact that this may be changing somewhat, but do you think that that's still an animating principle of politicians? I mean, just cynically, I mean, regardless of how you may feel, is this something that can still be exploited?
I think, I agree with Darshan, but I think I might slightly disagree with him. I think identity politics is at the very core of democratic politics regarding vote banks and constituencies. So, even if there were no identities, democratic politics will produce them in some ways. Like in the U.S., we have, people go for who's women's votes, where they are going, or, minority votes, African Americans, who they are voting for. So even in such, supposedly an advanced democratic, economy, we still have identity very much in place. So the role of identity in that sense will continue to exist. But I think Darshan is right. In the case of Modi, Narendra Modi, he has transformed his image, and he also lays claim, actually rightfully, justifiably, that there have been no riots in Gujarat minor or major compared to any other part of India where there have been some. So in that case, he has completely changed its governance, and he's running on a very developmental, platform.
So, how are the two linked? If the two bases on which you might cast your vote are identity politics or the actual issues, might a community perceive an issue in a different way based on being a member of that community? I mean, are they not linked?
Yes, historically they were linked, and historically, because India was more of an agricultural society, it was more rural issues, and many Indians lived in poverty and in rural areas. So, and it didn't really matter what identity they had, but nonetheless they were all in the same boat. But now that things are changing, there's a more urban population, they're not interested in identity politics, because in a big city everybody is mixed up. They're interested in development, they're interested in corruption. And a survey which has just come out in the last 2 days asking what are the major issues, 75% of the respondents said corruption. 25% said development. Nobody said identity.
Well, we've touched on this a number of times here, but what are the regional dimensions within the country? And is there, can you be all things to all Indians as a politician, or do you have to really focus your message on particular parts of the country?
Yeah, and India is actually a deeply pluralistic society, much more so than the U.S. And that's why you mentioned earlier 370 parties in India. And so while for the majority of its history after independence, it has been ruled by the Indian National Congress. But in the last 20 years, it has shown its true colors as a very pluralistic society. So you have very strong regional parties. So you have the communists, in Bengal, in Kerala, some states. In Maharashtra, there are different kind of. So there are different parties that have emerged. So in that sense, it is very hard for any party to be everything to everyone. And that's why there is no single party that's going to win the election. It's the alliance. So when we talk about these BJP and Congress, we're actually talking about two different alliances they're part of.
So when is the last time there was a clear winner that was not a coalition government, if you will?
I think there has not been any since, you could correct me, since 1984, I think.
Yeah, I think since Indira Gandhi won and after the Bangladesh war, and she got a clear majority, and even Rajiv Gandhi got a clear majority, which was a sympathy vote, but not since then.
So in any case, even the election will just be one step in a process then. Are we fairly clear on how those coalitions will be formed? I'm thinking, for example, of the last German election, where the election was over and the process of forming a government was an extended one.
I think it's been, India has seen a lot of hung parliaments, as we say it, as we call it. And hung parliament means that eventually no party is able to kind of get an alliance to rule as a majority alliance for the country, and usually the parliament is dissolved and new elections are called for. But for the last, I would say, maybe 14, 15 years, they have been the alliances have stabilized quite a bit. There have been, smaller parties sometimes moving in and out of these alliances, but mostly they have, since at least 1999, they have held in place, surprisingly.
Yes, I think probably coalition government is here to stay, unless somehow, unexpectedly, the BJP gets a clear majority with its coalition partners. But everybody is open to coalitions, regardless of the rhetoric. The Congress Party particularly is even more open to coalitions than it was before. And as I mentioned earlier, the non-Congress parties, the non-BJP, non-Aam Aadmi parties are talking about a third front coalition. So we're not quite sure how it's going to work out, but... And
I think Darshan is right in that sense, because that's why identity politics becomes difficult, because these coalitions, there is no, BJP may be considered a Hindu Nationalist party, but it has to play by the rules, that others can also accept. So it's very hard for any single party to kind of run the whole agenda. So they have to follow other parties, and and that's how politics as well as the legislation gets made.
Well, we've got just about a minute left, and with the disclaimer that as we are taping this show, voting is still going on, so we don't know the results, but the viewers may. How do you think this election really reflects the reality of today's India?
I think it reflects it very well. India is changing from what the finance minister, the current finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, he gave an interview a couple of days ago, and he said India is changing from a petitioning society to an aspirational society. In other words, previously the government was giving handouts to people and people were asking for handouts. Now they have aspirations. That's how it's changing.
Very good. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it at that. Aneesh, Darshan Pandya, thank you very much. To our viewers, see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,